I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who writes about my personal life on the internet, but here I am. Maybe writing this down will help me make sense of it, or at least let me feel like I'm not losing my mind. I've been married to Emily for 6 years. We met through mutual friends at a summer barbecue. She spilled sangria on my white shirt and spent the rest of the night trying to make it up to me. I was hooked from the start. She was funny, sharp, and beautiful in a way that seemed effortless. We built a life together. A house in the suburbs, 2 golden retrievers, the whole deal. Things were good until they weren't. It started subtly. Emily began acting different, distracted. She'd always been good at balancing her career and home life. But suddenly, she seemed preoccupied. I'd ask her about her day, and she'd give me these vague, distant answers, like she was only half listening. She started working late more often, coming home smelling faintly of some unfamiliar cologne. I tried to push down the nagging feeling in my gut, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then came that Friday night. It had been raining all day, one of those cold, relentless downpours that seeps into your bones. I came home from work earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Emily with takeout from her favorite Thai place. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed the warm glow of the kitchen light spilling out through the rain-speckled window. She was in there, her back to me, chopping something at the counter. For a moment, everything felt normal, like old times. I walked inside, shaking off my wet jacket, and called out, "Hey, Em, I brought dinner." She jumped, clutching her phone like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. Her face flushed as she shoved it into her back pocket. "Hey," she said, too brightly, "you're home early." Something twisted in my chest. "Yeah. Figured we could have a quiet night together." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. While she set the table, I casually asked, "Who were you texting just now? You seemed pretty into it." Her expression flickered, but she quickly covered it. "Oh, just work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it, but my mind was already spinning. After dinner, she went to take a shower. Her phone, for once, was left on the kitchen counter. I hesitated. I hated the idea of snooping, but that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't let me ignore it. My hands were trembling as I picked up her phone. A single new message lit up the screen. "You were perfect." My heart stopped. The text was from a number I didn't recognize. Before I could think, I unlocked her phone using the passcode I knew but never used. I scrolled through the conversation thread. The messages were intimate, filled with inside jokes, longing, and stolen moments. My stomach churned. Then I saw the sender's name tied to the number through a shared photo account. Daniel. Daniel, my childhood best friend. We hadn't spoken in years, ever since he moved to the city after college. I told Emily stories about him, how we used to play baseball in the street until our moms yelled at us to come inside. I never imagined she'd meet him, let alone this. I felt sick. Memories crashed over me. Daniel teaching me how to ride a bike, sneaking beers in high school, standing next to me as my best man at our wedding. I thought he was long gone, just another face in the past. But apparently he'd never really left. I put the phone down carefully, like it might explode. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional or something more? And why him? Emily came back into the kitchen, her hair damp and smelling of vanilla shampoo. She smiled like nothing had happened, like she wasn't tearing my world apart piece by piece. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Answers. Proof. Plan. So I played along, pretending everything was fine, while inside I felt like I was drowning. I didn't sleep that night. The rain kept falling, relentless against the windows, matching the storm in my chest. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me wants to confront them both, burn everything down. Another part of me can't let go of the life we built, even if it was built on a lie. I keep hearing that text message in my head, over and over. You were perfect, but they weren't, not even close. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. Emily was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady, like she didn't have a care in the world. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I decided to play it cool. If I confronted her too soon, she'd deny everything, twist the story, make me question what I knew. I needed more proof, more clarity, before I could face her or Daniel. The first thing I did was call in sick to work on Monday. Emily had already left by the time I got up, humming to herself like it was just another ordinary day. I hated how effortlessly she could fake it. I spent the day digging. I searched through old photo albums, social media accounts, anything that might show a connection between Emily and Daniel. I found nothing. He hadn't posted on Instagram in years, and Emily's profiles were spotless. No suspicious likes or comments, no secret messages, at least none I could see. Then I remembered something. Daniel's family still lived a few towns over. His mom, Mrs. Harper, used to adore me. I figured it was a long shot, but I gave her a call under the guise of catching up. She was thrilled to hear from me. We chatted for a while about old times, and then, as casually as I could, I asked, "Have you talked to Daniel lately? I haven't seen him in forever." There was a pause on her end. "Oh, sweetie, you didn't know?" My stomach dropped. "Know what?" "Daniel moved back about 6 months ago. He's been living out near Maple Ridge." "He didn't tell you?" I barely managed a response before ending the call. 6 months. He'd been back for 6 months. The exact time frame when Emily started acting distant. My head was spinning. I decided to drive out to Maple Ridge. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need for answers. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy. After about an hour of driving, I found his street. A quiet, tree-lined road with modest, well-kept houses. His name was on the mailbox. I parked down the block and sat there for what felt like forever, trying to summon the courage to knock on his door. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and walked up the driveway. My hands were shaking as I rang the bell. No answer. I rang it again, longer this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, I heard the soft click of a door unlocking. The door creaked open an inch, and there he was, Daniel. He looked older, tired. His face was lined with something deeper than age, like he'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. For a second, I thought maybe I was wrong, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. "Jake?" he said, blinking in disbelief. What are you doing here?" I could barely find my voice. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, like he was checking to see if someone else was inside. After a tense moment, he stepped aside, letting me in. His house was small but neat, the kind of place you move into when you're starting over. He offered me a beer, but I refused. I needed a clear head. We sat down in his cramped living room, the silence stretching between us like a loaded gun. Finally, I said, "I know about you and Emily." His face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like he couldn't decide whether to lie or confess. "I'm not here to fight," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. I need to understand." He let out a shuddering breath, burying his face in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy with guilt. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "I never meant. I swear. Jake, I didn't come back to ruin your life." "Then why?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why her? Why my wife?" He flinched like I'd struck him. "I didn't know she was your Emily at first. We met by accident at a coffee shop downtown. We started talking. It felt easy, familiar. I hadn't felt that way in years." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to hit him. "So what? You just went with it?" "We didn't know who the other was until later," he said, voice cracking. "By then, it was too late." His words echoed in my head, sharp and cutting. They hadn't planned it, but that didn't make it better. It almost made it worse. "I ended it," Daniel added desperately. "Weeks ago. She didn't want to, but I couldn't keep living like that." My breath hitched. Weeks ago? Emily hadn't seemed heartbroken or distant. If anything, she'd been lighter, happier, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. like she'd moved on. I stood up abruptly, my hands trembling. Does she know you told me? No, he looked defeated. I never wanted you to find out. I'm sorry. Sorry. Such a small, hollow word for something that had shattered my life. I turned and walked out, leaving him there, broken and ashamed. As I got back into my car, the rain started again, cold and relentless. I sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my mind racing. Emily didn't know I knew. She was still playing house, still lying to my face every day. But now the truth was mine. The question was, what the hell was I going to do with it? The drive home felt like a blur. The rain coming down harder, pounding against the windshield, matching the storm inside my chest. I kept replaying Daniel's words over and over in my mind. I ended it. She didn't want to. I'm sorry. He'd sounded genuine, broken even, but that didn't make what he'd done any less of a betrayal. And Emily. She hadn't seemed like someone mourning a lost affair. She'd been fine, happy even, too happy. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Emily's car was there, but the place felt empty, hollow, like the life we'd built had already crumbled, and I was the last one to realize it. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, the rain masking my ragged breathing. My hands were still shaking, knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face her, but I couldn't avoid it forever. I forced myself out of the car and into the house, my soaked shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. The familiar scent of vanilla and lavender hit me like a punch to the gut, her favorite candles, still burning softly in the living room. I called out, my voice hoarse. No answer. The house was eerily quiet, except for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. My eyes landed on the small table by the front door, the place where we dumped our keys and mail. Her phone was there, screen glowing faintly with a new message. I knew I shouldn't. I'd already crossed that line once. But something inside me, some dark, desperate need for the full truth, made me reach for it. The message preview read, "Unknown number. We need to talk. I can't keep doing this." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Was it Daniel? Had he changed his mind? Before I could think, I unlocked her phone and opened the full message thread. My chest tightened as I read. The messages weren't from Daniel. They were from someone else. A different number entirely. Unknown number. I can't believe we got away with it. He still doesn't know. We need to talk. I can't keep doing this. Every muscle in my body tensed. This wasn't about Daniel at all. This was someone else. Footsteps sounded softly behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Emily stood there at the edge of the hallway, her hair damp from a shower, wearing an old sweatshirt she always slept in. Her eyes widened when she saw what I was holding. "Jake, what are you doing with my phone?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I held it up, the unread messages still glowing on the screen. "Who the hell is this?" Her face paled, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, fear, panic. But just as quickly, she masked it with practiced calm. It's nothing," she stammered. "Work stuff. Don't lie to me, Emily." I snapped, my voice rising. "I know about Daniel." Her eyes widened again, this time with genuine shock. "What?" "I went to see him." My voice was cold, steady. "He told me everything." She staggered back, like I'd physically hit her. "Jake, I didn't mean for it to happen." I cut her off, stepping closer, holding up her phone. "But this isn't Daniel, is it?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked trapped, like a cornered animal. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice trembling with barely controlled rage. Her eyes filled with tears. She took a shaky breath, like she was about to confess something far worse than I'd imagined. And then, her phone buzzed again. A new message, this time from the same unknown number. "We have a problem. He knows." The room seemed to tilt. My mind raced, putting together pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. Before I could speak, there was a sudden, Sharp knock at the front door. Emily's face drained of color. Her breathing hitched. I turned slowly toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to run, to not open it. But I did. The porch light flickered in the storm as I pulled the door open. A figure stood there, soaked from the rain, face obscured by the darkness. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly. Eric, my old college roommate, Daniel's cousin, the guy I hadn't thought about in over a decade, until now. He stepped forward, his eyes cold and unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly. And just like that, everything fell apart. The world seemed to stop as Eric stood there on my front porch, rain dripping from his soaked jacket, his face pale but set with grim determination. I hadn't seen him since college. Not since a wild, reckless summer where Daniel, Eric, and I were inseparable. But now, seeing him here, after everything, my mind reeled with questions I couldn't begin to answer. Emily let out a small, strangled noise behind me, something between a gasp and a sob. I turned toward her, fury bubbling to the surface. "You're going to explain this, now." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes darted toward Eric like she was silently begging him to fix this, to make it all go away. Eric stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. His presence filled the room with an uneasy tension. He ran a hand through his wet hair, his expression dark and unreadable. "Jake," he said slowly, "you need to sit down." I clenched my fists. "No more games. Tell me what the hell is going on." He sighed heavily, glancing at Emily again, who now looked like she might collapse. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he muttered. "Not this way." "Find out what?" I roared, my voice cracking. Eric took a slow step toward me, his eyes locking onto mine. "You think this is about the affair? About Daniel?" He shook his head. "It's so much bigger than that." I froze, my mind racing. "What the hell are you talking about?" Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling. We didn't want you involved, Jake. We were trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed bitterly. "By sleeping with Daniel and texting him behind my back?" Eric cut in sharply. "Daniel was a mistake. Distraction." His voice hardened. "But this isn't about him. This is about what we did." My blood ran cold. What we did. Eric must have seen the confusion in my face because he exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over his mouth. "You really don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" I snapped, panic rising in my chest. "The cabin," Emily whispered, barely audible. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "The one by the lake. That last summer." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Memories I'd buried deep surged back. Drunken nights, bonfires by the water, and one terrible, haunting night I'd done everything to forget. The night Evan died. Evan, Daniel and Eric's younger brother. I staggered back, struggling to breathe. What does that have to do with this?" Eric's jaw clenched. "We made a pact, Jake. After what happened, after the accident. We swore no one would ever know." I remembered it all in jagged, broken pieces. Evan had fallen off the dock after a stupid, drunken argument. We tried to save him, but the current was too strong. His body washed up miles downstream days later. We told the cops he wandered off drunk, that we didn't know what happened. It was a lie we lived with, all of us. I shook my head, refusing to believe where this was going. That was years ago. We agreed to move on. Eric's voice sharpened. "Someone knows. Someone's been watching us. They've been sending messages, leaving clues." His gaze darkened. "We thought it was Daniel. We thought maybe he cracked. But now I'm not so sure." Emily broke down, sobbing quietly. "The messages started after Daniel moved back. We thought he was losing it." I stumbled back, my mind spinning. You think Evan's death wasn't an accident?" Eric's voice was cold and deadly. "I think someone's making us pay for what we did." Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed again on the table. We all stared at it like it was a ticking time bomb. I grabbed it with trembling fingers and opened the new message. Unknown number. You can't bury the past. Time's up. Before I could process the message, there was a loud, deliberate knock at the front door. 3 slow, measured knocks. We all froze. The rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. No one moved. No one breathed. Eric slowly reached for the drawer in the entryway table and pulled out a small handgun I didn't know he was carrying. We stick together, he hissed, his eyes blazing with determination. No matter what. The knocks came again, harder this time. And then, the front door handle started to turn. The front door handle twisted with a slow, deliberate motion, the metallic click echoing through the silent house. Eric tightened his grip on the gun, motioning for me to step back. Emily was frozen, her face pale and tear-streaked, her body trembling. The door didn't open. Whoever was on the other side seemed to be testing the lock, almost playing with us. 3 more knocks. Slow, steady, purposeful. I could barely breathe, my mind caught between past and present. Memories of that fateful night at the lake colliding with the reality of someone standing just beyond our door. Someone who knew. Someone who wanted us to pay. Eric moved toward the door, gun raised. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice cold and steady. I nodded, feeling like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. We all flinched. Eric motioned for me to stay put as he crept toward the door, his footsteps eerily silent on the hardwood floor. He pressed his back against the wall, gun aimed at the entrance. Who's there? He barked. No answer. His eyes flicked to me. Turn off the lights. With shaking hands, I hit the nearest light switch, plunging the house into darkness. The rain outside intensified, lightning flashing just long enough to cast jagged shadows across the room. Jake! Emily's voice was hoarse, panicked. We shouldn't have lied. Before I could respond, something slammed against the door, hard enough to make the frame rattle. Emily let out a muffled scream, clapping a hand over her mouth. Eric took a deep breath, steadied the gun, and reached for the doorknob. He counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. He yanked the door open, gun aimed, ready to fire, but no one was there. The front porch was empty, just rain-soaked steps and the dark, endless street beyond. Eric stood frozen, his breathing ragged. Check the yard, he hissed. I bolted to the nearest window, pushing the curtain aside. Nothing. The rain was so heavy I could barely see past the front lawn. No movement, no footprints. It was like whoever had been there vanished into thin air. Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed again on the table, making all of us jump. My stomach twisted as I reached for it, dread sinking like lead in my chest. Unknown number. You're looking the wrong way. Before I could react, glass shattered behind us. We spun around just in time to see the living room window explode inward. Shards sprang across the floor like deadly confetti. A figure in a dark, rain-soaked hoodie climbed through the broken window with terrifying ease, landing in a crouch. Eric didn't hesitate. He raised the gun and fired twice. Bang! Bang! The flashes lit up the room like lightning. The figure collapsed backward, sprawling half in and half out of the broken window. Blood pooled quickly beneath them, mixing with the rainwater on the floor. Breathing hard, Eric advanced cautiously, keeping the gun trained on the unmoving body. Stay back, he barked. But something felt wrong. The intruder hadn't made a sound, hadn't screamed or struggled, just dropped. I crept closer despite Eric's warning, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My eyes locked onto the figure's lifeless form, the hood still pulled low over their face. With a shaking hand, I reached down and slowly peeled back the soaked hood. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't some faceless stranger. It was Daniel. His lifeless eyes stared blankly up at the ceiling, a dark bullet wound blooming across his chest. Emily collapsed with a strangled sob, her knees giving out beneath her. Eric swore violently, backing away, his hands shaking. He He broke in, he was coming after us. But I couldn't speak, couldn't move. All I could do was stare at Daniel's lifeless face. The man who had once been my best friend. The man who had been involved in something far darker than I had ever realized. Before we could process what had just happened, Emily's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. Unknown number. Daniel was never your enemy. You should have kept the past buried. Now, I'm coming for the rest of you. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Suddenly, we heard the faint sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. The sound of the footsteps above us echoed through the darkened house, slow and deliberate, like whoever was up there wanted us to know they were coming. Eric swung the gun toward the staircase, his face twisted in panic and rage. Emily clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. This isn't real, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It can't be. The footsteps stopped. Right above us. We stared at the ceiling, frozen in place. The rain outside intensified, the wind howling like something alive. Time seemed to stretch painfully, every second an eternity. Eric motioned for us to move. Get to the basement, he hissed. Now. Emily hesitated, still paralyzed by fear, but I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the narrow basement door near the kitchen. Eric followed, covering our retreat with the gun still raised. We stumbled down the steep basement stairs, the air cold and damp. Emily fumbled for the light switch, but when she flipped it, nothing happened. Power was out. The only light came from Eric's phone flashlight, casting long, flickering shadows on the unfinished walls. I felt trapped, caged like an animal. The air was thick with dust, mold, and the suffocating scent of fear. Eric pushed an old workbench against the basement door, barricading it as best he could. His face was tight with concentration, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We stay quiet, he whispered, barely audible. We wait them out. But even as he spoke, we heard it, the slow creak of the basement door handle turning. We all froze. The door didn't open, but whoever was up there knew exactly where we were. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost dropped it in my rush to silence it, but curiosity got the better of me. With shaking fingers, I opened the new message. Unknown number. Do you remember what you did that night? He begged you for help. You left him. I felt like I was going to be sick. My hands shook as I shoved the phone back into my pocket. Suddenly, there was a sharp bang against the basement door, so hard the workbench shuddered. Eric raised the gun, aiming at the door. Stay behind me, he growled. Another bang, then another. The sound was relentless, pounding with terrifying force. Emily was sobbing now, clutching my arm like a lifeline. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, over and over. We were just kids. We didn't mean. Crash. The door splintered inward, with shards scattering across the basement floor. The workbench tipped over with a deafening clatter, and the door hung crooked on its hinges, gaping open like a wound. And then, silence. We stared at the ruined doorway, waiting, breath held. Eric's gun shook in his grip, finger twitching on the trigger. But no one came through. The rain hammered against the house, thunder rumbling in the distance. It was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Eric took a cautious step forward, gun raised. He moved closer to the door, slowly edging toward the base of the stairs. Don't, I whispered. Eric, wait. Before I could finish, the gun flew out of his hands, yanked away by something in the dark. Eric let out a strangled yell as someone or something dragged him into the shadows. He disappeared without a sound. Eric! I shouted, rushing forward, but Emily yanked me back, sobbing hysterically. And then we heard it, a voice from the dark, low, whispering, familiar. You left me. The words twisted in my chest, cold and accusing. Emily screamed, and the basement lights flickered to life. The sudden brightness was blinding, and for a second, I thought I saw him standing there. Evan, soaking wet, pale, his empty, hollow eyes boring into mine. But when I blinked, he was gone. The basement was empty. Only Eric's gun remained, lying on the cold, damp floor, covered in blood. My phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. You can't escape what you did. It's your turn now. The basement door slammed shut, trapping us in the cold, suffocating dark. And we were no longer